Mind over matter, overcompensating, overstatements, crookedness relating, a soul's churn in return, mental overstimulation, one word, riveting, it terrors my pilot, streams that are promised to make seeking less. I am the host of Poetry Journal podcast, and I'm here with the philosopher's poet, podcast himself, host himself, and welcome back. Can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Good to hear from you, man. Let me share something quickly.
Okay.
I want to share a little piece of something, and then I'll share with you, some certain things that I've kind of just been looking in today. All right. It says, a ticking time bomb, if I ever saw one, in the palm of my hands. It's called greatness, smitten with grotesque that runs deep like swans, drowning in the onslaught like the weather as my globe warm. Telling of the times I had no one. Telling of the times I had no one. Telling of the chimes with hand strong like crumbs, then watch me disappear into the great beyond like I've dodged reality, or part of me has merely absconded. Now my clothing renders with a split reality. Thus I tell my life of the time of great realness with a hint of damned.
Ooh. You know what my favorite line for that was? The first few lines, I think you said something like greatness, and you said it was either riddled with grotesque or something to that effect.
Yeah, the line was, it's called greatness, smitten with grotesque that runs deep like swans.
I love that line because it speaks of the fact to me that obviously a lot of the premise or the sort of crescendo of what you spoke to me speaks of sort of the idea of the oneness, the being fully present with oneself and with, if you want to call it God, you can call it that, whatever you call it. But that first line speaks of the idea of greatness and grotesqueness, two seemingly diametrically opposed, let's say, forces being in tandem. But then how many men and women throughout history have been made great, but they've only been made great through acknowledgement and embracing their own grotesqueness and turning it into power.
There you go. It's hard to see one without the other. It's hard to have half a coin. Do you get what I mean? Like half a face of a coin. There's always two sides to it. Do you get what I mean? And so, as much as you might have, the good side, there's no yin without the yang. So, of course, greatness comes with, the great part. There's one facet that it's the good. It's the bravado, it's the attributions, it's the positiveness that comes with it. But then you go to the other side of it, and that's where things get a bit perhaps grotesque. And it runs deep, so much deep that it's dark. Yeah. You get what I'm saying? Where, things are not as sweet as people would imagine. And that speaks to the sacrifice. Because, as you know, yes, it can get dark on certain side when it comes to sacrifice, and when it comes to things that you experience on the way there, and sometimes it starts small. People talk about, oh man, it's lonely at the top. It's not only lonely at the top, it's lonely on the journey as well. It can be at certain facets, as you're going towards where you're trying to head. But on top of that, there's also the evolution or the mutation of certain facets, like loneliness. Do you get what I mean? Where it can kind of elevate or evolve to something else. And these are all these little things that you have to worry about, and they play a point. And
Yeah,
they're like variables. Do you get what I mean? On the road that you
yeah,
have to face. These little battles that
yeah,
nobody really pay attention to or even think about that you're experiencing.
yeah,
And sometimes you might hint at it, but at the
yeah,
same time, it's not a complaint. It's literally just you, just being honest through what you express, because there's a price to pay for
yeah.
what you're looking for, I
This,
suppose.
I mean, I don't know if you've heard of the saying, to whom much is given, much is required.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's the first thing that came into my head. The second thing that came into my head is that this is really the story of myth and legend, the hero's journey, the journey through the underworld and into the afterlife, or to die and be resurrected again,
Yes.
stretching all the way back from Kemet. Um, that is a lonely and painful journey, but brings divinity, satisfaction, and glory, not in the ego way, but in the sort of realization. Um, that's
Yeah.
what it is. Yeah.
Absolutely, man. Okay, so this is something I wanted to share with you today. I wanted to hear your thoughts on it,
Hmm.
and then I want to kind of broaden the scope a little bit with the idea behind it. But I saw it in the newspaper. Well, I was doing my research anyway, but basically it says author Sarah Collins funding a creative writing bursary to offer aspiring writers from Black British Caribbean background the opportunity to pursue their literary passion. Um, in terms of like creative passion,
Yes.
whether that means writing, just basically just creatively pertaining to media or publications. All the different facets, even music, whatever it is. But and I think uh, they they went to I don't want to just throw the university out there. I want to be specific about the exact university. Oh yes, that's it, Cambridge. So they actually went to Cambridge themselves, and they studied creative writing. So I suppose the thing was going towards that. Now when I saw this, um,
Yes.
FD asked, "Are we going into the deeper meaning today?" Yes, that's pretty much what we were just breaking down just now, and just from the piece that we were talking about, the first two lines, that's what me and philosopher's poet were just breaking down. So yeah, you could say that. But back to what I was saying, it kind of begs me this question: do we have enough support to our create? Do we have enough support for our creatives in today's society? Like, what's your take on it? Did you want to speak on the idea itself, because you have to respect it, where like you're trying to put on for your own or put on for people where you think, oh man, somewhat they're not getting the respect they deserve to, or the support they deserve to, and we're gonna go deeper into this because I have more information, but
Hmm.
I just want to kind of get your take on just the superficial part of it, just
Okay.
the idea.
Well, on the surface and from an individualistic point of view, I applaud what's being done.
Yeah.
Uh, I would say, but in the grand scheme of things, yes, creatives are generally, I'm going to say, overlooked in society in terms of value.
Mm.
I'm going to say that, yes, there are well known creators, but like with most things, that's probably what a minority, a really small minority. And those creatives, and what the field down, even though it's not really talked about, I believe that a large majority of those who are incredibly influential and famous, they didn't, most of them, not all, had a helping hand, and that in part stems from being in community society who allowed them to cultivate and reverb their talents and their abilities, and that's both socially and both economically. Just told them, okay.
Are you there? Oh, you were doing something.
I just trying to help you. I still got feedback.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, and you know, to your point, of course I respect it as well, and you know that's one of the reasons I thought it was something to share. In light of pursuit of something what was the other term? I think that's about right. Yeah, so it's something to celebrate, and so I thought, that's something to bring to the forefront, as in like, man, that's really positive, I respect it, etc. But it also begs the question on a larger scale, do we do enough to support our creatives in today's society? I think it's a mixture, man. And to what you mentioned something, today's society is overlooked, perhaps, how much creatives bring in. And to that point, I was looking, and in terms of the impact on UK's economy alone, and this is from lordslibrary.parliament.uk, and it was basically just breaking down the UK gross value added in terms of billions by creative industry subsector in the 2022 period. And if I could just pick out, obviously, publishing to begin with, publishing was like 11.6 billion in 2022. IT software, of course, that's big. Computer services, 55.4 billion. Film, TV, radio, photography, 20.8. Advertising and marketing, 18.8. Music, performance, and visual arts, which is where we are.
I think
just friends. Music, performance, and visual arts, 11.2. Architecture, 3.7. Design and designer fashion, 3.2.
Sorry, man, I still got this that I'm talking here.
Sorry?
I can still hear my voice in the background.
You can hear music?
No, I can hear it. So when I speak, it's like an echo.
1 sec. About now?
Hello?
About now? Yeah.
Hold on. Yeah.
Actually, I did hear that part. Yeah, I did hear it just now. But I think you should be alright now.
Okay, yeah. Hold on. Oh, man. No, I'm still here. Hello?
Better?
No.
Wait, what about now?
Hello? Hello?
Yes, I'm here. I tell
Okay.
you what,
Aspects.
you wanna disconnect and reconnect?
Yeah, hold on.
Yes, indeed. Just having a bit of technical tonight. Just having a bit of
Yeah.
technical tonight. Um, yeah.
So,
So
I,
I
I,
was just
go
sorry.
on. No, I was gonna say because I heard the list you went through. I don't know if you want
Yeah,
to add anything else.
yeah. I just wanted to kind of throw that out there as something as something to a bite size to perhaps keep in mind and maybe break down if it if we allude to anything that brings relevance to you. But just these numbers alone, just to kind of overlook it, it just, man, this is it's a lot, and so I thought to myself, man, this is very relevant to creators and their impact.
Yes.
um
Oh,
if including writers, as a whole, like the creative industries is a booming thing, man, especially in the UK. So, it's not something that should be overlooked or disrespected.
I don't undervalue the value of it, and the numbers, the figures you gave were significantly, huge. I don't
Yeah.
dispute that at all. I think it'll be really good to dig into that because in a lot of those industries, like when I was 18, I studied architecture at university, and you mentioned that.
Yes.
Um,
3.7 billion
yeah.
in 2022.
Now, that's a very interesting field from my experience as a student because most of that wealth is obviously generated by a few very large practices.
Mm.
So I think if you dig further, especially with some of those, there is a question around where does the productivity and the wealth generated, how does that trickle down? Like if sometimes people talk about distribution of wealth or productivity, but then there's
Yeah.
something about what's the sort of standard deviations between, let's say, groups of people, and that it's interesting. That was my personal experience of having the lecturers taught to me and then work experience. Um,
Yeah.
you know,
Okay. Okay. Let me add a bit more info to the topic, and let me know what you think about this. So, census. I did a little bit more research, and this was from. See if I can find there. It's I have it here, but it's kind of like a it's basically, I just say it just like it is. It's DOB. I think it's an acronym, obviously. It's www.dob.com. It's kind of like a press in itself, like a research site. I think it stands for World of Books, but that's the point I wanted to make was what they're speaking about. It says census by the ALCS, which stands for Authors Licensing and Collecting Society, and also CLPE, which stands for Center for Literacy in Primary Education. And they basically they're stating that 5% of the published authors in the UK were people of color, and 4% of children's book in the UK feature a protagonist of color. So I guess basically what I kind of looked into was, I really wanted to trickle down and find out, how much of these numbers per se, we can imagine that, it's of impact to people of color, and that's people of color. So it's still quite a wide in the minority scale, on the minority scale.
Yes, I think I was making the same point with the architecture practice. I remember one student said to me that most architects who make it out, who are black or minority ethnics, don't actually end up becoming fully qualified architects. Yeah. So I think this sort of doesn't go across all the boards, but a lot of these in the creative industries. And I find it interesting you started with GVA or sort of productivity. I think there's a structural issue with the way it's valued, because it's great that the creative industry generates jobs, it generates businesses, generates income. What about the value that creativity provides outside of money? Often creativity, writing, art, media, they're ways of expressing ideas or challenging ideas. And sometimes in a non-judgmental way, sometimes it's very biased, but it's a way to get out ideas. Maybe that bit's in terms of the value of creativity in one aspect.
Yes, indeed, and the I'll just add, to get to this point, actually, where they make a point, and let me just add to that. With the research, basically what it was saying was, actually, I read that to you already, but basically the topic of the article actually is they're basically stating black authors are still vastly underrepresented despite growing demand. Do you get what I mean? So it's not as if there isn't a demand for creatives from certain specific backgrounds or minority backgrounds, but it seems it's because they're in demand, but it seems some way somehow they still find a way not to get the not to get the support, perhaps, or but it begs another question that I thought about, but this had me thinking. It definitely had me thinking. So the other thing I was thinking about is how many writers and published authors do you know?
Wow. I don't know loads of published authors, to be perfectly honest. Are we talking about in general, or are we talking about from the group that is underrepresented?
In general. Let's start there.
Okay.
Let's start there.
In general, not a huge amount, I'll be honest. To be honest, when I pick up a book these days, it's not either not sort of the latest or current books, and it's more about the content rather than the actual author.
And as we said, in general, so not necessarily story. It could be either story or poetry or anything. Even a script, anything.
Yeah.
And you're saying little to fair.
Yeah. Obviously, there are a couple of really or relatively famous black poets that everyone sort of knows, but other than that, I think for every famous black poet, there's probably about 10 English poets who are famous. More. Yeah.
But at the same time, when you think about it, at the end of the day, don't they? It, the famous people that we know, I'm sure they still would fit within that 5% either way. Do you get what I mean? So perhaps they don't really count if they're famous because they're just an outlier.
I guess when I said famous, I mean famous irrespective of their roots or whether they didn't grow up in socially and economically advantageous circumstances. Because I was thinking more that those well-known and funded creators, let's say writers and poets, um, in that 5%, they're more likely to have an advantage in a background which cultivates their talents and has the social and economic means to better support it. Um, Also, not every community is amenable to the creative arts or the creative industries, and there are still a lot of communities who have and understandably so in terms of the society we live in and what brings in income, have a bias towards more traditionally academic pursuits.
True.
And I mention that because that can become a great conflict if there are the of the next generation, the children or others in their community who don't want to pursue those same um,
Very valid.
careers, and
Let me
that
put something to you. Let me put something to you. Do you remember growing up, or even now, when you hear about certain people in our community, and whether you hear it from the horse's mouth or them, the child, which means people around our age. One of the most common one is, my mom wants me to be a doctor, an astronaut,
lawyer.
and all these different things. But I don't recall ever hearing, "Oh, my mom wants me to be a writer." Do you can you recall that one?
No, I never heard that in my life. But then on the other side, my mum was never really one of those who said, "I want you to be a lawyer or a doctor." She was fairly liberal in her mindset. I think she was a bit of an anomaly. But still, I would say around me, yeah, yes, you're right. So, doctor, lawyer, even accountant.
Mm, even accounting.
Yeah.
you know so I guess what I'm saying is, at the same time, I'm very aware that as much as what we're talking about, certain things like, next to this, in terms of like, oh man, this is very a respectable field, like the doctor, the lawyer, all these different field. um I suppose the point I'm making, perhaps marketing is a factor here. Do you get what I mean? It's not the
Yeah.
most marketable field, and it's not the most, and in terms of marketing, it's not the most sexy,
Mm.
to an up and coming uh child that has talent of this type of, within this type of field. It's not the most forthcoming, even with encouragement from parents, etc., to really embark on a journey to be a writer or specifically a creative, unless the outliers, like, the computerized type of creative, etc., etc.
Mm.
It's would I be off the charts, or would I be off the reservoir by saying, perhaps, being a writer is somewhat of a niche?
Um, I'm gonna say, like broadly speaking, yes. I would say being a writer is niche. If you look at the number of writers.
And let me explain that more. I'm not saying necessarily that, it's not something that, oh man, people there are people out there doing it. But I'm saying compared to like say the doctors, people growing up saying I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a doctor, I want to be an astronaut. I just can't get the same. I can't put writing in comparison to like those type of aspirations. Do you get what I mean? To say, oh man, yeah, it's up there with those, because I hear those all the time, and it's very rare. It's not until, you know, perhaps people come of age like myself, then I realized, you know what, this is something that I wanted to do.
So, do you still believe that a lot of people have this image of a writer, especially in this country, that's deeply that's entrenched deeply within sort of old English literature, even down to sort of the image of the person? Do you think that actually hinders people become writers because of an image, especially if you don't fit that image?
To be specific, I think the marketing or the how people view writers as a whole, I think that might be a factor to play on you know, on how people see it, and so affect their aspiration to actually want to embark on a journey within that field. I think it's a factor, but I can't overlook the other, you know, the more important leading factors when you're talking about what we're speaking about, like say, especially when it comes to specifically minority community or the black community, the sportsman, you know, the runner, the basketball player, the rapper.
Yeah.
You know, I think maybe that's a factor as well, where these things are so much at the forefront that perhaps someone like myself, unless you kind of grow to know the world for what it really is as opposed to what it's marketed to be, you're not necessarily privy to the opportunities outside of commercials.
You know what the interesting thing is?
Yeah.
Just how, if you want to be an athlete, football player, a rapper, that you know that obviously a very small proportion of people make it, right?
Correct.
It's the same way that if you want to be a famous and successful writer, only a small proportion of people become very, very famous. It's interesting because they both those careers have high competition and high, you know, that the successful individuals are relatively small in size, but the only difference is that all those careers you mentioned that are like, let's say they're like the cut and paste mainstream careers of a stereotypical careers. The only difference is, one, those careers might be seen A, as quick money, even though that's an illusion, and B, there's still a perception, especially along the lines for younger people, that those careers are associated with a more, let's say, a more socially accepted identity in some subcultures. I use the word subcultures here, so I don't like to make the blanket assumption that everyone within a community sees it as the favourable career option. There's loads of things that come into it.
Absolutely.
But I would certainly say that there's an element of, for lack of a better phrase, coolness attached to it and attractiveness. It's like saying, why should I be a servant in heaven when I can be a prince in hell? That's an extreme analogy.
Yeah.
And it might not be that way. You might actually be able to do some positive things you make as an athlete or a rapper. But like everything, there's a price to pay, and
Yeah. But with
Obviously,
what you just said though, there, I have to say this. Doesn't that speaks to the marketing also?
yes, yeah, for sure.
Like how
Yeah,
they portray it, as opposed to what it is.
yeah,
Because at the end of the day, being an athlete, you be lucky. I would say the average, and I'm just throwing it out there because I haven't done no research on it, but I would say the average is what, 3 to 5 years if you're a
yeah,
pro, average. So I would say the great ones make it to, like, say, the 10 to 15.
yeah,
The transcendent ones makes it to, like, say, 20.
yeah.
That and what you're talking about, that's the Tom Brady, the LeBron James,
Mm.
those type of people. So it's very rare, to have that out there.
And
You
then
know.
even you made a good point again there about the lifespan. Let's say your average 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
Again, the idea of fast money, and this is similar to back in the day with even with boxers.
Yeah.
Fast money, um, obviously high risk, high reward, but then a larger portion of these celebrities spent all their money. Um,
Mm.
so the back end of that is your upbringing and to an extent lifestyle is also an advantage or disadvantage in terms of how you understand in your relationship with money and the
Yeah.
scarcity. Um, I'm not sure. I've never heard a very famous writer go broke. I'm not saying it's never happened, but
That's a good point. I would say there probably a few factors involved that, because if you imagine a writer, some way along the way you're going to be well read up on finance if you weren't before, because by nature you are supposed to be somebody that knows about the world, because you have to write about it. Sooner or later you might have to do some research, because that's the story that you're going to create. You're going to veer in towards that part of the world, so you're going to have to, even if you've never been there, you somewhat have to do your research and know about it. It kind of brings me back to somebody, a writer I met a couple months ago, and I didn't. We were having a discussion about. She was telling me about a novel she's creating, and why that's relevant is because it had something to do with a jazz musician, and I was just telling her 5 minutes ago that I had a discussion on my podcast with a jazz musician, and so it kind of clicked in her head that, what, this is something that could be useful for me pertaining to the story that I'm creating. So, even if it's fiction, you somewhat have to do some kind of research, because at the end of the day, even though it's not real, you still have to have some kind of logic and realism to it. So even as writers, and you're not writing even if you're writing fiction, you still have to do your homework, to know what you're talking about,
yeah.
to create within the line.
Hmm. Um, I mean, every discipline, every skill, every profession, even including athletes, it has a level of intellect. It's not in the same genre or field or even the same type, but intelligence is multifaceted. It's not a singular thing. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, but I'm not saying that's not the case. But you have to remember, especially when it comes to sportsmen, athletes, etc. Certain things, it's not necessarily broadcasted.
yeah,
Like handling your money, especially, and you have to remember the age as well.
yeah,
The age plays a factor, because normally it's at that age where you're still a young, you're not fully a man yet in terms of your thinking. You're not mature enough yet. in terms of your thinking to know that, you know what, you're thinking this is gonna last forever,
Yeah,
essentially, and that's really not the case. So you know, having finance, except controlling your finance, etc., it's not a thing unless you know you go through some extreme situations that I've heard from you know professional and famous athletes where they kind of understand. Oh man, you know, it really hits them hard where like it made such an impact where they end up or you know from that point on being very smart with their spending and saving all the time constantly, but that's not the norm. You know,
no.
the norm is the majority of athletes go broke after prior their retirement from their professional sport, so.
I mean, this is where the idea of this is where the idea of most famous creatives. Let's talk about writers. We're talking
Yeah.
about the proportion who were black or minority ethnic. This is this intersects with the idea of social circumstances.
Yeah.
Um, and so, if you grew up in a family that has some savings, some equity, even if they're not rich, you're more likely to have a better understanding of finances than you are if you grew up in a working class family, even if your family themselves weren't financial experts.
Yeah.
By way of osmosis, if you know your family has equity, has a mortgage, or you know these things, or life insurance, that information gets passed down to the children. And equally, it's the same when you have a lot of young people who get on the property ladder if their parents have some sort of equity for support. I'm not. That's not related to this conversation, but as an example of you already have an advantage based on your social and economic circumstances, and social and economic circumstances are also we can't untie that from culture and race. That's not to say that this doesn't happen to working class English people, because it does. I'm just saying there's an overlap, and so it makes sense to some extent if you think about it, and the idea of being famous, fast money.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I understand where you're coming from, but you know that brings into specifics that we're not privy to at the moment. And the reason why I say that is because you're right. You know, I think everybody is somewhat open, vulnerable, or susceptible to that type of situation. And if you think about, I would say, I would argue, majority of athletes or a large population of them come from, you know, poverty background because, and that's one of the driving force to kind of really propel them to want different or want something better for them in life and to not you know stay in their situation in the first place. So but you know with that being said, there's also the factor or the situation that they that with coming from by default coming from a poverty background, that means you're not privy to a lot of the things that you're speaking about, like financial understanding, you know, business acumen, knowing how to invest as opposed to just spending, um, saving more than you spend, investing more than you spend. You know, all these type of factors that I think play a part in people being pretty much reverting back or staying some way, shape or form going backwards as opposed to going forward or staying or standing still. You know, you can picture a treadmill, you're running, but you're really not going anywhere because your spending hasn't changed. And you know, you have your friends around you that are really not your friends, and you're budgeting all their situations, you
yeah.
know, and that's always going to leave you in the dirt.
So, what I was thinking was, sorry, reverb. I got a bit of reverb.
Good now?
Hello?
Yeah.
It's better, it's better. Oh, no, it's better. So what?
All right. Go on.
What I was thinking, we were talking, right? And you elaborate on a point was that when we gain money or we get out of a bad situation, we talked about growing up and getting out of poverty.
Yeah.
That's interesting because materially we would have changed, but our mindsets haven't changed. It's the same way where we talk about transmutation. That hasn't actually happened. We haven't actually done the work. We've just adorned ourselves in all the things that speak to us about luxury and wealth, but we're still in a poverty mindset. So we haven't done the work. We've only taken on the outward form. We haven't looked inside. You might call that knowledge of how to manage money, but it goes deeper than that because knowledge is just knowing intellectually what to do and what not to do, but behaviors, sometimes behavioral.
You're talking about the discipline.
Yeah, and discipline. Yeah, discipline and our behavior can be a stronger barrier to financial success or career success than intellect and knowledge about how to do things. Just someone knows how to do something doesn't mean they'll do it.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
I'll give you an example. Because it took me a while to get my handle on how to manage money properly, if I'm honest, as a young adult. Even though I knew, there's a savings account here, there's these accounts where you can save for a mortgage or you can do X, Y, and Z. I didn't do a lot of those things. You're like, yeah, I'll sort out one day. Yeah, but I'm living in the moment, right here, right?
Oh, you mean YOLO?
Yeah. And I'm gonna buy this £200 T-shirt as a 25-year-old, and I'm gonna wear it every single week because I can't afford another £200 T-shirt. It's gonna get worn out in a club in the West End, and I'm trying to look the part, but I'm making a fool of myself.
Which is, I understand. You know, it's like I said, going back to the beginning when I was speaking about the marketing behind, being accomplished or accomplishing, being a professional in a specific sport, like even being an athlete, like we're talking about, or in comparison to being a writer. There's so many different things at play, but at the same time, the athlete mentality is tunnel vision. So you're so much focused on being the best you can be when it comes to sports, wherever your profession is, ideally, as opposed to being a writer where you have to be so well read and you try to kind of you be ravenous when it comes to knowledge. You're always trying to be a sponge and learn new things. The two are so different, and perhaps that speaks to somewhat the transmutation that you're speaking about. But at the same time, when you think about the marketing behind being an athlete, some of these things are not taught. Some of these things are not shared to people that, this is fast money, and sooner or later it's going to slow down. What are you going to do when it slows down? will you save? Will you be smart with what you're getting initially, or during the process of your career? Because one day, um, perhaps soon after you're finished, all these little trinkets that or things, sacrifices that you do for yourself, they're gonna come into play. But if you haven't invested in yourself, and for example, I think one of the smartest person to do it is Floyd Mayweather. You know, look
Yeah,
how
I
he
would.
invested in himself, and everybody around him is eating. And he not only saw himself as a fighter, but he saw himself as a businessman, a business, and he invested in his growth. He invested in his brand. He did so many things to the point where he became the factor when it comes to anything to do with him. He's being paid directly. I think perhaps he cut the middleman out some way at some level, or sometime after he started making money, real money. And so everything kept pouring back to him. He became his own franchise essentially. And I think that changed. That's the game changer for him especially.
Yeah, I
you
mean,
know
Floyd as an example. I'm also aware from watching quite a few interviews about him and with him, with people who knew him, about his discipline. Very few athletes got his discipline. I even heard a story on one podcast that when they used to go out to nightclubs, as an example, he was so disciplined about his physical condition and training. This apparently, I don't know if it's true, but this is apparently, he would drink water all night and then he would actually jog home at 4 in the morning in a nightclub. So not drinking and then getting a bit of cardio at 4 in the morning. I'm not saying that what that person said was true in the podcast.
yeah.
As someone said they knew him, but it's an example of discipline and an example of affirming and holding up your own beliefs and lifestyle, even in a place where you're probably quite tempted to, buy a bottle of champagne, go wild out. That's an example. I'm using that to say that that's a discipline where you do things in your own terms.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. And somewhat perhaps this speaks more to the a purer sense of transmutation, in terms of being transformed in all facets pertaining to your lifestyle and what's necessary to keep it. When it comes to Floyd Mayweather, whereas we don't necessarily see that for a lot of for the most part, majority of athletes, when they start making money and when they become successful, they they somewhat don't necessarily know how to keep or maintain their lifestyle, as well as keep their finance
Yeah,
stable and flourishing, as
yeah.
opposed to somebody like Floyd Mayweather. So it's somewhat almost like day and night when
Mm.
you look at it.
I mean, two sides of a coin. Just using that example would be Floyd Mayweather on one hand and Adrian Broner on the other side.
Yeah. Yeah, bro, that does like to floss that money, doesn't he?
Mm.
Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, man. Which is, I think anybody looking in from outside can see, the discipline is, and it's funny because I heard this, um, I heard this song today, and it's pretty much the same thing that we're speaking about, where success is all about discipline, and I see it somewhat like weight loss. The way you lose the weight becomes your lifestyle, because that's the only way that's the only way you're going to maintain it.
Mm.
And that speaks to the discipline. Can you not only lose the weight in such a way, but can you still live that weight, live that lifestyle, so you don't have to put the weight back on. Do you get me?
Yeah.
And so I think this is what we're talking about. But again, when you talk about people coming from poverty background with so many different distractions, you can take people out of the distraction, but can you take the distraction out of people?
Well, there are various mechanisms and processes by which people who have fallen victim to the fast lifestyle, especially athletes actually, um, that have been used. The big one for me, I remember back in the day, especially, was any system or process, whether that's sort of a philosophy or a religious system. Those are the sort of two common ones. It's
Yeah.
like it's like you know, I remember a lot of people. I remember at one point in the prison system was
So, do you know Thomas said Andy Peters? I'm not sure if you
Andy.
know.
The only Andy Peters I know. I'm not sure who. I can only think of one. I'm not sure it's that Andy Peters.
Okay, keep talking. I'll research him quickly while you talk.
So I was going to say philosophy and religion are two different mechanisms that people use for discipline. Like I remember it's a big thing for a lot of aspects of Islam. I'm not saying this to advocate for religion because I'm not religious. I'm just saying I can why it would appeal because it's a system which requires discipline as a religion.
Yeah.
It's like people often adopt the idea of relativism. That's another philosophical system thinking and looking at life. That's sort of based on discipline. So people find whatever one works for them and they apply that style in whatever their career is or ambition.
Yeah. I hear you. I hear you. I just double check quickly. Andy Peters is a journalist and voice actor, currently employed by ITV.
He the guy is he the guy who used to be on Blue Peter?
Perhaps, but I can't quite recognize his face. Maybe because I was young at the time, and he's 53 now. So that was Blue Peter was a while ago. I think.
I'm just curious, Thomas.
I'm not sure if it's still on now. But yeah, Andy Peters. I suppose it's a good show. I'm not. Maybe Thomas. Maybe explain why you wrote, why you suggested Andy Peters. Maybe you could kind of go into a bit more. But yeah, it's interesting. Some of these things. All right, here's something